Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Nucleus Wealth Empower. I'm Shelley George, Chief Operating Officer at Nucleus Wealth, and I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So this episode is a little bit different and I think a little bit special in that it's really a reaction or a post-commentary on yesterday's episode of Nucleus Investment Insights, where they talked about Cameron Murray's latest edition of his book, Rigged: How Networks of Powerful Mates Rip Off Everyday Australians, and some of the corruption that we see, or grey corruption as they called it, in Australia. So I sat down today after that to have a discussion with Nucleus Wealth's Chief Investment Officer, Damien Klassen, and talk about some of the ways in which we might be able to agitate for change or improve the situation that we have currently around corruption or grey corruption in Australia. So I really hope you'll enjoy this conversation. And just a few quick reminders before we switch to that. If you do enjoy the show or get something out of it, please give it a like and share it with any friends, family, or colleagues. And of course, you can sign up on YouTube to be reminded when we go live or have a new episode. Please remember, and whilst it doesn't really cover it in today's episode, but always that anything we discuss with respect to advice or such things is general in nature and doesn't apply to your specific circumstances. So you need to take those into account if you're considering it. If you have any questions or you want to ask us about anything around that, you can call us on 1300 623 863 or email contact@nucleuswealth.com. Lastly, if you have any ideas for future episodes of Nucleus Wealth Empower or Nucleus Investment Insights, you get in touch with us and let us know your thoughts. Same details, 1300 623 863 or contact@nucleuswealth.com. So, as I said before, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation between Damien and myself. Yesterday, you did a really interesting podcast with Cameron Murray, who is a friend of the show, and it was on his new book, or the newest edition of his book, called Rigged: How Networks of Powerful Mates Rip Off Everyday Australians. And I feel like that title really aptly describes the discussion you had. But also I wanted to talk to you a bit more about it, because talking to you after the show about how it went, and listening to the show, it really seemed that you guys talked a lot about the issues that we've had, especially political issues in terms of favours for mates, but not as much on some of the things that we could be doing to, I guess, improve the situation around corruption. So I don't know, in terms of that, where do you feel like you wanted to start off the discussion?
So I mean, I think probably should come back to Cameron's, I guess, definition, which we probably didn't explain deep enough for anyone who sort of hadn't sort of, or who hasn't lived and breathed it for the last sort of 10, 15 years, is this idea of grey corruption. And what he had done was, the reason for writing this book was, he was looking at it and with some people from overseas who were sort of looking at what was happening in Australia and going, this just wouldn't be treated, this wouldn't be tolerated in other countries. And it's the grey corruption of, okay, we'll use the Barilaro one where, if he created a job role, quite a high paying job role. Initially it was set up to be for people who had expertise in trade relations, and then they changed their mind and they said, we're going to make it a political appointment instead. And so effectively what they're doing is saying, we've created a $500,000 a year job in New York.
That's right. So it's not just about the salary, it's the location too as well, right?
Yeah, and we're going to give it to one of our political mates, somebody who basically has done us political favors, and this is a payback for they get to live in New York and get a taxpayer funded salary. And so we had a lot of outrage over the fact that he gave it then to himself. But where's the outrage for the fact that it was turned into a political appointment? Like, everyone there was just like, oh, well, it was a political appointment. It's just, we're giving to a mate of ours. And that's the type of grey corruption that affects everyone, that is just glossed over in too much of the Australian media. And there's it's not holding people to account, and it's not there's outrage over the extremities of it. There's not outrage over the fact that we've just got so much of this. And I think most of the recent stuff, from my mind, is that people have been doing it for so long, this sort of grey corruption, that what's happened is they just keep pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope, and now the outrage is because they've pushed the envelope too far, and whether it's a government that decides to start just willy-nilly handing out $1 million car parks, or making announcements for tens and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of grants just purely based on political stuff, or whether it's this type of stuff, this type of giving great jobs to political mates, or giving a great job to yourself, like that sort of pushed the envelope too far, and now people are a bit outraged about it. But we should have been outraged about the first stuff, like the earlier stuff, which is the broken windows and all that type of stuff that eventually builds its way into robberies. Is that like, well, let's get outraged about the broken windows, and maybe we won't have these robberies, because if you're outraged to the fact that they're making political appointments, then of course the person who's doing it's not going to appoint themselves, because they're like, well, they'll be outraged if I put one of my mates in there. There's no reason for me to put myself. Does that?
All right. So how would you distinguish between grey corruption and black corruption? Because I think that's the other term you used in the episode.
Yeah. So I mean, black corruption is the stuff which is illegal. So when it gets uncovered, people end up going to jail or lose their jobs or whatever it is. And so this is the part where, I'm a government official, and I give a contract of some sort to my brother-in-law, or to my to a family member at advantageous terms and all that type of stuff. And so that's the stuff where I get busted for it. I haven't declared my interests, and I lose my job, or in worst cases I go to jail. That's the stuff which everyone sort of agrees is corruption. The part which is like, well, I went to school with this guy and we're good mates, and we're part of the same. I'm doing him a favor now, and then he's going to give me a great job in 5 years' time. That's the type of stuff where it's not illegal. I've got a method of the fact that I knew this person in some form, may or may not have been worth declaring, but it's they might have been through a process that I could change the process enough to make sure that they got it. And the fact they then gave me a job in 5 years' time when I got out, and I got a nice cushy salary, that type of stuff is not illegal under our current system, but it is this grey corruption that's costing everyone something. And it's so rife, and it's so there's so much of it out there that the people that are outraged have been outraged for years, and it just sort of got a bit over it. It's like, oh well, there's just one more. And I think Cameron sort of expressed that opinion. He was just like, yeah.
He did, definitely. All right. So I guess the what I'm picking up on is this idea that people aren't getting they're not getting outraged soon enough or early enough. And so, there's plenty of stuff that's happening and it's just swept under the carpet. So, I mean, how do we change that? Can we change that?
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. I think there's, I think the guys at Macro Business and the guys at Michael West, I think are both sort of media organizations that are trying to sort of bring this to light, and I think, and Martin North as well, trying to bring this to light, are trying to change the societal norms and actually, get some outrage. The problem we have a little bit is that, I think some of our mainstream media is corrupted in this form of that they're too close to the politicians. They're meant to be they're meant to be holding to account, and I think that we saw some of that in the election campaign. Yeah, we saw some of that in the election campaign where there was somebody got thrown out of something where this was a private function just for the Prime Minister and journalists, where they got the journalists in and they plied them with drinks and food, and it's a social setting, and it was all about getting to know them, and it's much harder to write a hit piece on somebody who you might genuinely like. And a lot of politicians, they've got a lot of charisma. That's how they got there usually. So it's this idea that you've also got you've got people on the inner who are basically given these special tips. So as part of being, as part of sort of an unwritten agreement, okay, I won't write anything particularly bad about you. You'll feed me these lines and feed me the scoops, and so I'll get to be the hero as a journalist, and inside scoop, exclusive that I've got, and so
right. But at the end of the day, it's a society that accepts that, right? So, my question is, if I am outraged by the stuff that I'm hearing from Nucleus Wealth, Macro Business, Martin North, and Michael West, and I'm at a barbecue or a party, and I'm telling someone about it, and they don't care. Well, what do I do about it? I mean, if you don't move the perception of the masses, they continue to not care.
Yeah.
Let's everyone continue to get away with it.
Yeah, and look, the question there is, look, and I don't know, and I think though there's a part where, let's say something like a sexual harassment is I think is an example of something where 20 or 30 years ago it was like, well, somebody felt up somebody in the office or did whatever or looked at, and it was like, oh well, that's just happens in this, but bit by bit people move that barrier to say, well, no, it's not all right for somebody to slap someone else in the ass in an office setting. That is a, and it sort of got moved, and I think there's something similar needs to happen with this corruption side, where it does need to be talked about at parties and discussed, and people need to.
Dare I say it on social media? I know that around here, this idea of the social media justice warrior is disparaged, but it's an avenue, I guess, for airing this stuff and getting people to see it.
Yeah, and it does need to be that, this is not acceptable, and it might be that it's something like a sexual harassment that took years and years and years or decades to actually turn it around. But if you don't start somewhere, and you
might
don't,
even say centuries, Damien.
That's right. But
let's hope this is faster.
Yeah, exactly.
and it's old, right?
And there are parts where we spoke about in the show that I think there's when things are uncovered as to what's happening. Let's say the Royal Commission is into banking. So we uncover all these terrible practices, and politicians come out and say, oh yeah, I'm accepting every single one of the recommendations, I'm going to implement them all, and then they don't. Or they reverse and actually go the other way on some of them. That's the part that hold to account stuff is the part where I think people need to be more vocal about this, and we need to that's the part where you can't let things slide. You have crises, and you can't sort of the typical politician one, which is agree to everything and then delay a little bit longer and then slowly turn things around and then delay the stuff. Never call another review into whatever it was, and another review, and eventually just extend it out forever. And so that's the part where hopefully changing the discussion is about.
So I feel like what you're skirting around there is what some might call political apathy. And it's I think an interesting idea, because Cameron definitely talked about at the end of the episode. If you want to live a happy life, and people want to, then engaging with his stuff is not going to make you happy.
No, that's right. Look, so it's a. Having said that, though, I think in a way there's also the part to say, well, I can ignore all political stuff, and I can just fish and watch reality TV and sport and whatever else and disassociate myself from society completely. And some people are going to do that and are happy to do that. But I think you need to then I guess counterbalance that with saying, well, I can't make everyone want to engage in society, and but at least I can do what I can do, and I can also speak to the people I know, and we do podcasts and other people.
You can have the conversation, right? If it's something you care about, you can have the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And part of it is if you're outraged, I mean, people like part of this is this whole part of social media that and that's manipulated by Russia and China and everything like this is people who are outraged on social media. It actually affects other people. So there's shown the studies where um, climate change, for example, is that people come out and say and rationally go through the issues and say this is happening and this is happening and we've got these evidence of this, and somebody comes out in all caps and like you guys are crazy and you don't understand and you're going to destroy the world to satisfy some lefty greeny liberals and all that type of stuff like that. Now, people reading that discourse have read the first stuff and go, yeah, that actually does make sense. All this climate change stuff's happening. And it's not like they read this other person and then flip 100% back and then all of a sudden they're an anti, they're anti climate change, but they do move back and they go, oh, well, maybe there's two sides to this story. That person seems really, really upset about the whole thing. And so maybe, I haven't looked at it. I don't have the time to look at it, so I'll drift my view back from I think it might be real to I'll go back into the undecided or and so part of this part of this whole corruption thing is if you've got passion for it and you're talking to people about it with passion and explaining it, then it will change people's things to go, well, I didn't really think it was that much of an issue that politicians were giving each other jobs, and giving their mates jobs as payoffs and
creating jobs for themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Well, creating jobs for themselves, I think people are outraged about, but the part about creating it for their mates, we're not. And the part where we had government ministers going to work for the Chinese in ports that they'd just given them access to and stuff like that. There needs to be genuine outrage, and I think that's if you're speaking with passion, that will at least people go from being, well, I'm neutral about this whole thing because I don't really understand it, to actually maybe this is something I should at least care about a bit. So
yeah, right. Another thing from the episode I wanted to ask you about, or more actually wanted to just get your thoughts on it. So Transurban came up. Obviously, they had a pretty nice deal to build a toll road in Melbourne out to the airport, and part of that agreement meant no train out to the airport. So if you live in Melbourne or you're visiting Melbourne, you know how much you've been shafted on that front. And so my point and my question is, I don't want to let the investment banks off in this discussion. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff that comes out of the work that they do. I mean, I have a lot of friends in investment banking. I'm going to be careful what I say, but I mean, I know how it works between companies and governments and investment bankers, and the companies and the governments get the light shone on them, but very rarely do the bankers.
Well, this is a tough one, and it's tough to come up with a reason how you get around this one, because I mean that one's a classic example of saying, okay, you have a private company that's saying, I would like to build this road. It's going to cost me whatever, $3 billion to build it, but actually, you know what? I'll do it for cheaper if you guys all promise me that there'll be no no line out to that. And the fact that governments then say, yeah, okay, we'll take that deal. I think that's the part we need to be outraged. I mean, I know investment banks. I don't want to let them off, because I'm with you that I don't think there's lots of social good.
The companies themselves aren't necessarily the ones coming up with these exciting twists within the deals and stuff. I'm not going to say, I don't know in the Transurban case whether it was an IB or whether it was Transurban, but I do know that investment bankers are there to get the deal done. That's how they make their money, and so they're always thinking about a creative way to get something through.
Yeah, and I think though it's the part about they're trying to maximize their profits, and if they're, and I spoke a little bit about it, if they're going to replicate an existing road, they would much prefer to do that and then close off the existing road because they already know the traffic's on it. Whereas a government's job is actually no, we want to have traffic flowing faster everywhere, and if it means building a toll road to help ease congestion and all that type of stuff, that should be their plan. And if it means that people have got the choice between taking a train or or driving on the road, having a train should make the road better. Like, it should make the road faster and all that type of stuff, because there'll be fewer people on it. So I think there's for me, that's a part of I'm more concerned, I guess, about holding the governments to account than investment banks on that, because the investment banks are always going to give, this is the thing we would like to do that would make us the most amount of money.
Sure.
And we need to have politicians that are bright enough and understand if they don't do the best thing
Look
for
at the pay
the
disparity
voters.
between the two.
Yeah,
Like, who's if you're bright, where are you going to go?
but I guess it's this part about regulation, and some of it might just be the part about we spoke we touched a little bit on it, and in the movie The Big Short, they did a great example of where the regulator was out at this Vegas casino partying with all the investment banks, trying to get a deal, trying to get a new job so that she could go and work for one of these investment banks and get 5 times the money because she'd been working at a regulator. And I get that you can't restrict people's jobs too much. Like, you do want to let people have a restriction, but it is a thing about saying, well, if you're going to be a regulator, then you cannot go out and work for, it needs to be a condition of entry into this job is, if you are a regulator, you cannot then go out and work for whatever time period, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the time period is, to actually say you can't be out. You can't turn from policeman into a going working for the organisations that you're meant to be policing. And if that means we need to pay these people more money, and maybe we do, maybe we should be paying them more money, or if it means we need to be paying them some sort of extra amount once they've left, or whatever it is, it's that cycle between it, where if you're a regulator and you're not particularly well paid, and you're speaking to these Transurbans and investment banks, and you the implicit thing is, I've seen all these other people who worked for the regulator who played ball and agreed to these terms, and they got great jobs, in 5 years' time, when they decided to hang up the boots at the regulator and go and work for Transurban or go and work for competitors. That's the part where it's another one of these grey corruption things that really just sort of we need to change the what's acceptable, because at the moment that's perfectly acceptable, and everyone's got to earn a living and all that type of stuff. Is like saying, well, you need to come into this job knowing that this is, you cannot use this as a stepping stone to getting a high paid career with an investment bank by coming in and rubber stamping a whole bunch of deals. Don't think of that as your career progression.
Okay, right. And so really that comes back to public pressure on politicians to be doing something about that. And it's obviously not something that's on the agenda at the moment. Yeah,
but it's the standards of what we'll accept. And as I said, it's I think that's, I'll come back to that. I think sexual harassment is a good example of that. It takes years and years and years, but you need to change your standard of what's acceptable. And it's that part about, I might not be doing it myself, but if I'm seeing other people doing it, not commenting on it, then obviously it's not as bad as doing it, but you're contributing to the problem, by not saying anything. And I think this whole corruption, this grey corruption, needs to be called out, and that's why I recommend read Cameron's book, because he's got hundreds of examples of grey corruption, and call it out when you see it. Is that's not, that is not acceptable, and organisations need to hopefully start moving towards a point where they put the rules in and to prevent that. Because a lot of this as well is not stuff that is criminal. Like, I mean, the fact that I worked for a regulator and then turned around and got paid 3 times as much to work for Transurban or whoever it is, like, it's not something you can turn around and go, oh, that guy needs to go to jail. It's like, no, it's not like but it does need to be, okay, you've worked for the regulator, you've got a 5-year period where you can't be working for the people you regulated, or whatever.
It definitely doesn't pass the pub test in my mind.
Yeah, but it's not as your average person just goes, oh, well, that's just what happens. And it's the same as,
Do they really, or they're just not talking about it at all? I feel like I just don't know how someone goes, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't think they're saying it's okay, but it's like, and don't want to keep harping on the sexual harassment. It's like the sexual harassment. That's what happens. What am I going to do about it? Yeah, you shouldn't. He shouldn't be slapping people on the ass all the time. What am I going to do about it? He's a director of the firm. I can't fire him. I'm just a lowly employee. And so it is that part about going. People need to change their opinion of what is an acceptable behaviour in the corporate environment. or the regulatory environment. So yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I thought maybe I'd round off with a question of so I think we've approached the episode from the perspective of a societal cost, and that's clear. But what are the implications for returns and on investments of grey corruption?
Yeah, it is fantastically profitable for these grey corruption companies. It is fantastically profitable, and that's part of the issue is you get yourself in. So if the grey corruption is going on, you want to be investing in monopolies and oligopolies in Australia. Is basically the rule, because those guys can turn around and say, okay, for a few $1,000,000 of salaries across some regulators, or maybe not even that much, maybe a few $100,000 of salaries of a bunch of regulators as a sort of future promise of employment. I can get million and billion-dollar contracts. Like how great is that as an investment? Done.
Right.
I'll take that every day of the week. I mean, you look at the some of those resources taxes that they managed to get kicked out. I mean, they spent $10-20 million on advertising and got billions of dollars back in free royalties. You look at our oil and gas companies are they are some of the largest donors to political parties, but I feel like that it's under $1 million a year they donate, and they donate to both sides, and they get all this free, like the royalties in Australia compared to somewhere like Qatar or somewhere like that are there's hundreds of millions of dollars of difference, and you're sort of saying, right, for the cost of less than $1 million, you can bribe two political parties and get them and save yourself hundreds of millions of dollars. Make the
That is a really
ROI
good point, because
crazy.
even though they are some of the largest donors, it's still, you look at how much
It's
it
just
is,
not that
it's
big.
not much money.
No, it is it is a fantastic return on investment. And so from a company's if there is genuine change, then you need to assess and say that the companies are not going to earn as much as what they used to as what they did in the past. And so from an investment perspective, we own Transurban for that. Part of that reason is that they're very good at offering governments short-term deals, and short deals that are very good for governments in the short term till the next election, and very bad for
Electorates
for the rest
over
of
the long term.
for the rest of the lifetime of the deal. Yeah. So I think there is I'm sorry I picked on Transurban, because they're not the only one. There's plenty of others out there, but that they are they're I guess they're a classic monopoly position, in terms of they've got the only major road, only major tollway from one place to another. So monopolies and oligopolies, while you're not seeing any change, you need to effectively look at the fact that they're going to earn greater than regular returns. And the Australian banks are another good example. So when you look at Aussie banks versus international banks, they're some of the most expensive banks in the world, and way more expensive than most other international banks. And when you look at the returns they make, generally the returns are better. And so and part of that quite possibly is because we saw this commission into the banks and torn shreds off them, and this is terrible and all that type of stuff. And you turn around, how many years later are we now? 3-4 years later, and what's changed? Like there's been so they've basically just sold off their financial planning to hide that off to somebody else. Now it's somebody else's problem, and the rest of their business is ticking along as it used to. So from that perspective, maybe the Australian banks trade on such high multiples because they've got better relationships with local regulators and governments than their competitors overseas, and so they're always going to make a higher profit than what you see overseas, because they're effectively in bed with their regulators.
Yeah, right. Interesting and alarming. You touched on this idea of political donations when you were talking about the oil and gas industry, and I think to me that's a really interesting aspect. I just don't understand why we have it. why there. I mean, I understand. It's kind of actually, I think Cameron probably gave the answer in the episode when he said that, if you build a good regulatory system, then it will, you have hope that it can continue to be maintained at a good level. But if you implement a crap one, you've got no hope of it ever being corrected. So is that how I should feel? We have no hope of this issue of political donations.
Look, it can change. I think there's certainly developer donations with sort of a lot of state governments no longer accept developer donations, which is at least a step in the right direction. Like it's hard to it is hard for political parties to say, okay, we're not going to accept money from one class of people, but I guess it's the same logic should be extended to saying, well, why should any company donate? Companies don't vote themselves. Why should we give a company like if a company is donating to, especially to both parties, they're not doing it because they're nice citizens and they just want to help out the electoral process. They're donating because
they're here for democracy.
They want something done. And the thing is saying, and so what you have is you have a number of people at the top of these companies who are either donating because of their own political allegiances or donating because they want something done. And if it's the first case, it's like saying, well, that's fine. You can donate as a private citizen. Go, don't steal shareholders' money to donate. Do it as a private citizen. And if it's because you're trying to influence,
should private citizens be able to donate as well? Like, it doesn't make any sense because you're just buying power. Does that make sense in the context of democracy?
Well, who knows? I mean, maybe it should be a lower amount. There's an amount that level the playing field a bit. But the part about the companies is they're basically doing this because they want to try and influence legislation and change things to help themselves. And so, do we want a political system where effectively the laws are sold to the highest bidder? And most of the time it's that the banking sector is trying to get the laws changed to benefit all the banks at the cost of all the consumers. Whereas what we want our governments to sit back and go, no, I'm sitting in the middle here. I don't want all the banks to go broke, and I don't want them to run into problems, but also don't want the consumers to get ripped off by the banks. And so I'll balance things evenly rather than saying, why don't I give it to if I don't help out these banks, then they're not going to donate, and I might not make it into power again. So, yeah.
I know I said I was going to wrap up a few minutes ago, but actually, that concept of privatisation, I think that you kind of touched on there when you think about the banks, and you guys talked about it in the episode, is a really interesting one. Have we gone too far? The question sounds like it was asked on the show. Have we gone too far?
Yep,
in terms
absolutely.
of privatisation?
Absolutely, and there's areas where we do want privatization, and then there's areas where if you're private, especially things with competition. So let's say there's a government-run airlines is a good example of saying, well, look, there's plenty of people out there who are prepared to have airlines, regardless. Does the government need to own an airline to actually provide services to different areas? And if the answer is, and the answer might be yes in some cases if there's not enough, and often it's in the early stages. It's like, well, we're just developing this. We need to have a government, influence and all that type of stuff. But the monopoly assets, they're the ones where you need to be able to say, look, it's a monopoly. We can either spend all this government resources trying to completely understand the whole business and make sure they're not ripping off taxpayers by jacking up prices, and privatize it. And then you're saying, well, at that stage, if you needed that knowledge anyway, why don't you just run it? And at least you go, yeah, okay, it's going to be more efficient than it might be, less efficient than if you ran it from a private perspective. But if you lose all that efficiency gains anyway because the companies just take such huge profits, then at least it's inefficient.
I don't understand how it can be more efficient though, because you have everyone who needs to work within the company, and then you have all the people that need to regulate it.
But the other one is, it doesn't necessarily mean as well that the person who's doing let's say it's an airport as an example. So you have an airport, you don't necessarily have to run everything it doesn't have to be all government run. You know, you can go, okay, the government has decided to outsource the security to, you know, on a competitive bid over, you know, a 5-year period to this group, and then in 5 years' time, there's another competitive process about, you know, who's going to run the security for it. And then there's the second one's who's going to do the cleaning and who's going to do whatever it is and who's going to do the management. And, you know, there's that type of stuff where it doesn't have to be all, you know, every single person in there works for the government. You can have it as a you know, some parts are run by private section, but at least that overall monopoly profit part, that's the part where it's very difficult to give the overall monopoly profit part to a private organization and not have them try and rip off public shareholders. So,
all right.
I mean, it's effectively in there. It's in their you know, their mantra. They're out there to maximize profit for shareholders. They're not even hiding about it. So
you can't fault them for that. So, all right. Any final thoughts you want to add?
I don't know. This is now that I'm on my soapbox for anti.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
yeah, I guess. Yeah, so I mean, I think from an investment perspective, the way I look at these is understanding where they're getting value. It doesn't mean and sometimes that's the part where, you know, I try not to as an investor make a moral decision over this, because you look at a company and say these guys are making money because you know, they own some assets. You know, they're an airport. They make money because they own some assets and they rent those out to people who are going to come through and use that. You go, okay, well, that means they're going to get this type of return. And then you say, okay, but they're also a monopoly, and the government, they're quite close to the regulators, and so they're actually going to make, you know, 50% more than what they probably should be making, or 50% more than an equivalent you know, real estate trust of some sort, because they have such a good relationship, and it's a monopoly, and they're not being you know, they're not being policed properly in terms of how they're doing that monopoly. And that is something that goes into that investment calculation. And so I try not to take a moral point of view in terms of the investment side, but as a citizen, you know, you can't help but think there's better ways to distribute the gains of society, rather than letting some individual companies, you know, make much greater returns on the back of close relationships with regulators.
All right. And if you're an individual and you care about this stuff, talk to people about it. Make noise.
Yes. Yeah. And part of the, like this, you know, we spoke about the ethical side, like, in terms of our ethical investment. It fits a lot back with those types of ones about saying, you know, if you made a decision to say, you know what, that's terrible, I'm not going to invest in Transurban, that'll teach them a lesson. It doesn't make any difference. Like, it's what makes the tiniest of differences to their share price. The big difference is getting out and dealing with the political issues of, okay, are we going to allow people jump from side to side? Are they going to be regulated properly? All that type of stuff like that. That's what makes a difference. You deciding, oh, no, that company's not paying enough tax, or it's not doing whatever, I'm not going to buy their shares. It's really not going to fix the problem. Yeah, but we need something more.
All right. Absolutely. All right. Thank you. This has been a really great discussion. So thanks for your time, Damien.
Thanks.